Good evening and welcome to my fortnightly video chat. And tonight I'm joined by Annabelle Williams, my special guest, Annie. How are you, Annie?
Hi, Vern. Very well, thanks. How are you?
It's good. Very well, thank you. You're looking well.
Thank
Fit
you
and toned? Yes?
What's that?
Fit and toned.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yes.
That's very kind. I think that's a bit of an embellishment.
That's all right. I'm not prone to that. Now, Annie, when I look at your resume here, it's you've been to 2 Paralympics, 2008 in Beijing and 2012 in London, and you're a gold medalist. You've had 5 world records. You've been awarded the honour of the Medal of the Order of Australia. You're an international motivational speaker. You're a sports commentator and a TV reporter. You're a lawyer, and you're a brand ambassador, and you've also doubled as a stunt double for Charlize Theron. So when I look at this, I see a mountain of achievements here, Annie, but as legendary NFL coach Vince Lombardi said, he said, a person on top of a mountain did not just fall there. So what I wanted to sort of give us an appreciation, just a little insight into some of the tremendous amount of effort, both physical and mental, that's gone into your achievements. I sort of want to go back to the base of that mountain, and then we'll work our way up to the apex. So I don't think this is the apex. I think you're only some way up this climb. I think there's a lot more to go in the Everest of your life. So you were born with a disability. The forearm and hand.
Yes.
Not form. Yes.
Whenever I'm on Zoom, I feel like it's a bit of a show and tell. Wow.
So really, from a young age, you've had to sort of face challenges, and I remember watching a session you did, and you know, just like tying shoelaces or putting your hair in a ponytail, you know, things that able-bodied people, well, both are, take for granted. But that's been from day one, really, with you, hasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. I think that I mean, when I was young, I didn't really realize they were challenges, but as I've gotten older, and I have faced more and more challenges, I've looked back and I realized that actually I've had quite a lot of resilience because I've been forced to overcome things every single day. And that has instilled, I feel very grateful for that. I mean, people often ask, you know, not often, but, you know, people have asked me, you know, if you could turn back the clock, would you change your situation? Would you be born with 2 arms? And my answer is no, because I really don't think I would have the resilience or the determination that I do have now. And I suppose when I was younger, I think a lot of the grit and the determination came from the need to prove that having 1 arm wasn't going to be a limitation for me, which in some ways could have been an unhealthy way to approach it. But it's meant that over time, I guess I've kind of been able to get on with things a little bit more. But those 2 examples that you gave, I actually remember when I learned to tie my shoelaces, because a teacher, I was probably in kindergarten, so I was probably about 5 or maybe 6. And we were changing from our school uniform into our sports uniform. And I remember my teacher said to me, if you need any help tying your shoelaces, just let me know. And I had no idea how to tie my shoelaces, but neither did anyone else in my class. And I remember thinking, why did she only ask me? And so I went home and I said to my mum, I have to know how to tie my shoelaces by next week's sports lesson. And so my mum and my dad helped me every morning and every afternoon figure out a way to tie my shoelaces. And that was just one, you know, everything that I did, basically, I had to find my own unique way of doing things. And my parents didn't know what that would look like. And so it was a lot of patience on their part. I remember I wouldn't let mum or dad leave for work in the morning until I had successfully tied their shoelaces for that whole week. And I don't think it was particularly successful, but right before the sports lesson the next week, I kind of figured out what looked like a version of a shoelace that had been tied. And so I went to my sports lesson. I said to the teacher that I would like to spend this sports lesson doing everyone's shoelaces in the class. And the poor teacher, who was so lovely, she let me. And so we sat in a big circle, and I just went from one student to the next, tying everyone's shoelaces. But that was to say that it was, you know, I always did have to find my own unique way of doing things, and I've always had to think outside the box, and I think that helped me be good at problem solving. But it has not been without incredible support from my parents and from teachers, like the teacher who allowed me to do that. So so from a young age,
I was going to say there's a team behind successful people, and you've been very fortunate with your folks, Mark and Joe, there, with their attitude. It's been life is a challenge, but we will face that challenge, and you don't know what the solutions are. You have to improvise. You have to work your way through it. I think the important part is not to be defeated by it, or to find a way around it.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. No, you're right.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, the resilience, grit, and determination you talk about, that was instilled at a very young age, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was actually really, well, my parents, and then also my grandma, my mum's mum, who was like my soulmate, I guess. And she'd been through a lot of adversity herself. She was a widow at the age of 25 with 2 young children. My grandfather died very, very suddenly in a car accident when my mum was 3. And she was a teacher, but back in those years when women were married, there was the Married Teachers Act. And so women who were married weren't to work anymore. And so she basically had to beg for a job. And she saved all the money she could to give my uncle and my mum the most amazing education, and she took them on holidays and all sorts of things. And so she really was someone who just put one foot in front of the other. I never heard her complain. She never fussed over things. She was very practical, and she and I just got along like a house on fire. And she taught me so many lessons. I remember one of the things she always said to me whenever I was facing a challenge, and I think the first time she said this to me was when a boy at school had asked if he could sit next to me the next day at lunch, and I was probably about 10. And so I remember thinking, I'm basically being asked out on a date. And when we sat down at lunchtime, I obviously forced all of my girlfriends to sit close by, and he forced his guy friends to sit close by, and we had this very awkward 10-year-old conversation. And at the end of it, the lunch itself was fine, but at the end he stood up and said, in front of all of the people who could hear, all of my friends, all of his friends, everyone who was in the playground, he said that he would never sit next to me again because he thought it was so weird that I only had one arm. And I remember just wanting to disappear. I thought that he had voiced what everyone else had actually thought, that everyone was being kind to me out of the goodness of their heart, but they all just thought I was very weird. And I remember I went home that night and I said to my parents, I was like, I'm never going back to school again. I said to my grandma, that's it, like, school's not for me. I'm, leaving school at the age of 10. And she said to me, I remember this, she said, the way that you see yourself is the way that other people are going to see you. And so if you see yourself as someone who is capable and full of energy and happy and, living a full and wholesome life, then that is the way other people are going to see you. Forget this guy. You lead your life the way you want to, and your view of yourself will be the view that other people take. And that was the most amazing advice, because it wasn't overnight. I remember going back into class the next morning. The next morning I was still like, I'm not going to school. And my grandma walked me to school and she said, you have to face your fears. You can't run away from them. And I think, now I appreciate that even more. I have a young daughter, I have a 2-year-old. And, the fact that she really just got on with things, she faced her fears when she probably wanted to pull the covers up and disappear at times. She walked me to school that morning, and I remember she kissed me on both cheeks and she said, this kiss gives you our love, and this kiss gives you the courage to be brave. And I walked into class still feeling really vulnerable, but this sense of support from her and my parents. And but then there was actually a teacher at school who really stood alongside me. She didn't speak to me about the incident the day before. I'm sure she'd heard about she had obviously heard what had happened, but in the first lesson of the day, she said, this boy was in my class, and she said to the whole class that we were going to do this creative exercise. And we had to draw a superhero, but the superhero had to have a disability. And everyone in my class drew a superhero that had one arm. And she
Fantastic.
hung the pictures at the front of the classroom for the whole year. And it was really another indication of, you know, someone who just stood alongside me when I really needed them to. And I think that that has informed the trajectory of my life. These sort of people who have stood up for me, showed me kindness, and stood alongside me at really pivotal moments where if I hadn't had that level of support, you know, who knows, it could have been, you know, days or weeks of feeling like I was losing confidence, and it could have really affected my self-esteem. But I was very, very lucky.
Yeah, you don't realise the influence that has for the person doing it, like the teacher. It could have been just a feather on the scale, but for you, it was a beautiful weight on the positive side of the scale that you know just is what you need, and that's that support mechanism that's there that can have a huge influence on that game between your ears.
Mm. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think I've read a book, you may have read it, Vern, called Growth Mindset, or it's called Mindset, and it's all about the growth mindset. And the author is Carol Dweck, she's a psychologist, and she works at Stanford actually. And she speaks, the whole idea of the growth mindset is not that it's the most talented person who wins the race or, you know, is the most successful. It's a combination of passion and perseverance over the long term. And so it's kind of developing that mindset from a young age, I suppose, just this view that, you know, even though things were going to be a challenge, if I just persevered hard enough, if I worked hard enough, and if I, you know, really dedicated myself, then ultimately I knew I could achieve the things that I wanted to, a lot with support. And crucially, she speaks about that as well, the vital part being support from other people. Absolutely. And I think it's worth noting that, I mean, I'm very honoured to speak at, you know, lots of conferences and things now, and people make the good point that, you know, I was just lucky to be born into a wonderful family. And I know your three girls were in the same position, but not everyone is. And I think that it's important to point out that finding a support network, you don't have to be born into it. You can it only really takes, you just need someone, and you can find that person. You know, it doesn't have to be someone it doesn't have to be a parent or a grandparent. It can be someone who you sort of meet along the way, who can provide just the same amount of support.
Yeah, so someone who will just believe in you, you know, sees that quality. But I'm a huge believer in success is the old 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. It's there's a lot of hard work goes into it. And I think another one of Lombardi's quotes is that the only time success comes before work is in the dictionary. And,
that's true.
And it's so true. He's a fond of good quotes. But then swimming wasn't you've excelled at swimming. That's got you the Paralympics, got you your world records, but it wasn't your first sport of choice, was it?
No, it was absolutely not. I thought swimming was the worst sport. I had tried it when I was young, and I thought it was so antisocial because you could not chat to your friends, and you had your head underwater, and I constantly smelled like chlorine, and I was itchy, and I hated swimming. But my mum was an incredible runner. She was a hurdler and was actually on track. She ended up sustaining an injury, and so had to retire, but she would have been an extraordinary athlete, much better athlete, I'm sure, than me. But I just wanted to follow in her footsteps, and so when I was quite young, I fell in love with running, and my event was the 400 meters. But unfortunately, I trained on a tartan track for years when I was an early teen, and it really affected my shins, and I developed stress fractures in both shins. So I remember thinking for a period, oh my God, I've got one arm and the use of no legs. This is not going well. And it was really, for anyone who's had stress fractures, they are really painful, and there's not a lot you can do except rest. And so I remember I was diagnosed with, originally I was diagnosed with shin splints, and the physios and the doctors said to me, you have to stop running. I didn't listen to any of them. I persevered. I had a lot of determination that I was going to keep running on that tartan track. Then then they eventuated and they became stress fractures. And then it was at the point where they said, you really can't run. So it was devastating for me because I was in the preparation squad for the Athens Paralympics in 2004. So this was 2003, I found out that I had these stress fractures, and a year out from the games, and as a little girl, I mean, one of the greatest things for me when I was young, really young, 8, 9, was that I met these athletes, runners, a girl called Amy Winters in particular, who had the same disability as me. She competed in athletics in Sydney at the Sydney Games, and I went and watched her. And so from a young age, I had really just admired those girls and felt like I had this sense of community, people who looked like me and understood what it was like to have one arm. And then that was my goal. My whole passion and reason for being was to run and to make these Athens Games. And then it was the first time in my life, even though I had faced a lot of challenge, every day, little challenges, they were always things that I thought, I know I'm going to be able to overcome this. I'll figure it out, tying my hair in a ponytail, tying my shoelaces, peeling a potato, I'll figure it out. This was an example of something where there was just a roadblock and there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. I was told I couldn't run. There was no two ways about it. And so it was very abrupt, and it was very painful. And so it was another example of someone, I feel like I owe like so much of my life to so many different people, but it was a teacher at my high school, her name's Julia Danga, who said to me, I had always swum a bit. I'd always swum for school. I lived for a few years when I was younger in Jakarta, and that was where I did a lot of swimming because it's so hot. Everyone swims. She said, why don't you really focus on swimming now, and it might help you get back on the track sooner with the rehabilitation. And so I did that. And, she came to all the swimming trainings, and she took me to the trials for the Olympics and Paralympics, and I watched all these swimmers, and I think I was probably always more natural at swimming than running. And so after a year or so of doing a lot of swimming, I kind of forgot about, going back to athletics, and I'd found a new community of people through swimming. And so I owe a lot of that, but that transition was really thanks to Julia. I still feel like I want to call her Miss Danga, but she insists that I now call her Julia, seeing as though I've been out of school
couple of years.
12 years. So that was when I took up swimming. And then when I was still at school, I made my first Australian team in 2005. And then it was kind of, but it was a silver lining actually. And this is, and I know we'll discuss it more later, but it was a silver lining. I thought this terrible thing had happened to me, that I was never going to represent Australia, which was my goal. And I loved athletics, and that was it. And actually, what I thought was going to be the worst thing to ever happen to me ended up being one of the best, because I wouldn't have, even if I'd qualified for the team, I wouldn't have had the same level of success because I just wasn't as talented in athletics as I was in swimming. And so that has been something that I've also always taken with me when things are really tough and seem insurmountable. I think to myself, well, actually, you've been through a lot of things that seemed really tough and really insurmountable and horrible, but they've actually always made you stronger and more resilient, and they've led to a different path that might be ultimately a better one for you.
Yeah, I think it was Steve Jobs who, when he's speaking at his old university, said, it was about in life, you go back and you can join the dots, how he ended up in the italics course, he just wanted, and that's why we got italics with the computer, all these different fonts. He said, you go back and you join these dots, and that's, I think that's about that never give up approach, and saying, okay, the universe has given me a challenge or given me a message. Maybe I find the inspiration in that, to find the way through that. And it's what I've always said to our girls. I said, choices have consequences. All choices do. So you could have chosen to say, that's it, I'm done with my sporting career. That's it. I can't, and that would have had some consequences. We don't know what they will be, but you certainly wouldn't have gone on to get 5 world records and a Olympic gold medal.
That's right.
So, and I think that's part of the empowerment that we'll work up to is understanding that the choices you make will have consequences, and you've got to really work towards making good choices, or accepting that it doesn't always go the way you want it to, but what's the solutions here?
And I think also one of the things, that's absolutely right. And one of the things that used to paralyze me a little bit when I had to make a decision was I used to, write pros and cons and yes and no and why not. And then I remember thinking, and it might have been a quote I read somewhere or a book I read, and it said, you have to make the decision that is, whatever decision you make is made with the facts that you have at that point in time. So it's kind of, I used to always project into the future or return to the past, but you actually just have to sit in your mind and body at any present point in time and think, what is the best decision at this point in time based on the information that's available to me? And so that always helped me to make a decision as well. It's not necessarily that, I guess the other way of phrasing it, and this is a quote that I read, I think it's actually a children's book. There's an image of a horse and a little boy, and they're in a forest, and the little boy says, I can't see through the forest. And the horse says to the little boy, can you see the next best step? And the little boy says, yes. And the horse says, well, just take that one. And I think that is also very true. You don't necessarily have to see where the path is leading. You just think, well, this next step seems like a clear and logical one. Let's take this. And that's kind of, I think, how my swimming journey started. I thought, well, I can't run, so may as well go to this one swimming training session, and I probably won't do any more after that. And then that turned into a second swimming training session, and then a third, and then I had a competition, and then, it was a rolling effect.
And the black line became your life for quite a few years.
Yeah.
And so you go on to the 2008 Paralympics in Beijing. You're captain of the team as well at that time, and you qualified first for your pet event. You're prime candidate for the gold.
Yes.
What happened?
This is still this is one of those moments that will never not bug me, but also is one of those things that I actually am very grateful for what happened. So my main event at that time was the 50-meter freestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And in swimming, for those of you who don't know, you have heats in the morning. So all the competitors in that event swim in the morning, and then the top 8 qualifiers swim in the finals at night. So there's about 8 hours between the heats and the finals. And my swim from the heats ranked me first for the final. I was the fastest qualifier in the field, and I was in lane 4, the center lane in the pool, which is where always the fastest qualifier is. And I was 19 at the time, and I am a little bit embarrassed to admit this now, but I basically thought I'd won the gold medal after I'd swum the heat. I remember thinking that the final was a complete formality, that there was no way anyone was going to beat me. And this is such an amateur thing to do, because I'd worked with so many sports psychologists and coaches to make sure I did not do this, but between the heat and the final, when I should have been relaxing or using a bunch of techniques that I'd learned, like visualization, to visualize the race or the process, or the little bits and pieces that I'd worked on with my coaches and sports psychologists. Instead of doing any of those things, I was just imagining my victory lap, wandering around, like where my parents might be sitting and my auntie and uncle, like would I throw them the flower garland, like what, all these things are going through my head. And so when we arrived at the pool that evening, and I did my warm up and I was still feeling okay, but then when we marshaled in the holding room, the marshalling area, and when we walked out onto pool deck, it was as if I find it hard to describe. It just felt like everything started happening in slow motion. And I looked up into the stands, and it was the first time I'd swum in front of, I think there were about 20,000 people, and the noise was deafening. And I remember thinking, it was almost like I couldn't think straight. And I wanted to say to someone, can we just have another 5 minutes to process what's happening here? But obviously that's not how sport works. And so before I knew it, the whistle blew and we hopped up onto the blocks. And I clearly remember looking down at the water, and it was almost like the whole pool was pulsating. It looked really far away. And I was obviously either in the process of panicking or choking. Mm-hmm. And actually that's something that Malcolm Gladwell, he's got a book called What the Dog Saw, and he speaks about the difference between panicking and choking. And I can't remember what they are, but one of them you overthink something, and the other one is when you underthink something. And basically I dived in, the gun went, and I don't remember the race at all, but I turned around and I looked at the scoreboard and I had touched the wall 4th, and I was 0.03 of a second behind the third place getter. And 4th is the worst position. I wish I'd come 8th. At that point, I was like, well, I was so close to a medal and the honor of standing on the podium and, you know, taking home hardware. But I was also in lane 4. So I was acutely aware of the fact that there is just automatically a camera on the person in lane 4. And so I knew that there was a camera like in my face that was being broadcast around the world. And in that moment, you have to sort of muster all the courage you can to really be to hold it together, and
composed.
And I pulled myself up out the side of the pool, and I went over to the media pit where there's media from all around the world asking questions. And you know, I remember actually one of the first journalists I spoke to, of course they just say the first thing that comes to their head and what the viewers are interested in, not necessarily, you know, making sure that they're, you know, ensuring that they make you feel okay. And I remember the first journalist said to me, oh, you know, she was flicking through her pages and she said, gosh, you were ranked 1st going into that race and you came 4th. You must be gutted. And I was like,
if I wasn't, I am now.
Yeah, thanks. And I, you know, of course I said yes. And you say all the right things in the moment, but the minute I got away from the media pit, I went, and there was a change room just nearby, and I went in and I sat down on my own. There was no one else in there, just to sort of contemplate, figure out what actually went wrong. You know, you dedicate 4 years of your life to this one moment, and in less than 30 seconds it's over, and there's nothing you can do about the outcome. And then you start to question every single decision you've made over the course of the 4 years, and it all feels like it all comes crumbling down. It's like this wall that you've built for a long time just all of a sudden comes crashing down. And so I was sitting there, and after a little while, another girl came in, and she had also been in that race. She had the same disability as me. She was missing her left arm. And she sat down next to me. She didn't speak much English, but she put her arm around me and asked if I was okay. And, you know, I said, yes, I'm just disappointed. She'd come about 7th, I think, in the race. And I remember she said to me, you know, is your family here? And I said, my parents are here and my auntie and uncle. And she said, my goodness, you know, you just swam in the final at a Paralympic Games, and your family here is here to support you. You should feel so proud of yourself. And I remember at the time I knew what she was saying was right, but that's not how I felt at all. And I learned a few days later that she had lost her arm in a bus accident a few years earlier in Thailand, and both her parents had been killed in the accident.
Wow.
And it was just this moment where I felt like, you know, I had felt like this losing or coming 4th in this race was the biggest failure of all time. And actually, our biggest failures often end up being our biggest experiences of growth and our biggest lessons. And it certainly was for me. I mean, if I I did win a medal at those games, and so I did have that honor. And I kind of think, gosh, I would have missed out on such a life lesson about perspective and, you know, humility and all sorts of things if I hadn't had that moment in that change room with that girl. And I guess it's another example of someone who would have just made a passing comment. It would have been, you know, just you know, I can't remember how you phrased it, but basically a feather in there, you know, so they would have just gone.
It's a feather for them, but it's to you, it's a big weight. It weighs heavily on your scale.
Yeah. And I feel like these moments with the Paralympic Games, you know, that was a moment where I felt like I'd really failed, but I have had so many experiences speaking to athletes who have overcome the most incredible trauma. I mean, for those of you who haven't watched, you absolutely have to. There's a Netflix documentary at the moment called Rising Phoenix about the Paralympics, and the stories of the athletes in that program are just incredible. I mean, one of the guys, he lost his leg because in the Rwanda genocide, he lost it. Someone basically hacked it off with a machete, and then he watched his mother murdered in front of his eyes, and then he overcame that trauma to go to the Paralympic Games and compete on a global scale at a very elite level. You know, like the lessons I've learned from these people and Paralympians and the incredible strength and resilience is, you know, I feel grateful. So yes, she was someone in particular I learned a lot from, and I guess I had to learn actual practical, there had to be takeaways from it from a sports perspective, because I have more races that week, and how was I going to, get back up, that sort of mindset from one, turning off at the end of one day of the bad competition, the next day you've got to get up and compete again. And how do you shift your mindset to make sure that the next day is a clean, fresh day? You don't sort of carry the struggle from the day before. But in terms of the way I approached the whole experience of the Paralympics shifted from that point, because I saw it as something that was much more than just about, of course it's about elite competition, but it's much, much more than that.
Yeah, brilliant lesson, brilliant story. My mum had a lot of homespun wisdom, and she used to say, the man with no shoes stopped complaining after he saw the man with no feet.
Yes.
And it's so true. Until you get some sort of perspective, you don't realise you sort of got to just put things down back into a little where they belong. And don't try and make the mountains out of these things, if comparative to other people, what they're going through in life.
That's right. That's right.
So you had to you talk about regrouping. Well, 4 years later you go to London and taste the sweetness of success there with the gold medal relay team. But that 4 years, you've sort of had to regroup, and then you go to university, and you go to Bond Uni, which has got 3 semesters a year, not 2. So you've got extra load there with the law degree, as well as the training. So, obviously you had to, again, find that mental and physical strength and discipline to rise again, to go to London.
Yes. I think the thing that helped me a lot, it was actually a lesson I learned when I was in year 12. I had, when I was in my last year of high school, I had the Commonwealth Games. And I really wanted to get into law school. And I didn't want to do year 12 over 2 years, which is what a lot of people do in New South Wales. If they've got an elite sporting career, they sort of do this thing called pathways. And I didn't want to do that because I wanted to graduate with my friends. And so I remember I was very anxious that year. When I was at swimming training, I felt like I should be studying. When I was studying, I felt like I should be swimming. And it was so counterproductive. I was doing nothing well. And after a few weeks of that, I remember it was with no sophistication whatsoever, but I guess it was teaching myself how to be mindful. And I used to force myself. I said, Annie, when you're at swimming training, you are not allowed to think of anything but swimming training. Like if your mind remotely wanders to, the assignment you have or the exam you have coming up, you have to stop it. You have to figure out a way just to think about swimming. And it was the same when I was studying, and I became incredibly disciplined with that. I was just very strict with myself, and I was very structured and very, routine. I actually think that I remember at one point my dad, this was a bit extreme, but I used to set my alarm at like 5 o'clock in the morning to get up and start studying before I had swimming training. And I remember even my dad at one point said, you can just relax a little bit. And I thought, well, if your parent is telling you that you should relax, maybe that's a good idea. But I found that I was always very, driven. My parents didn't have to push me. That always really came from within. But then I think that helped me a lot in those 4 years, because, when I was in Beijing, that was my first year of, my second year of university. So for the whole 5 years I was at uni, I competed at 2 Paralympic Games, another Commonwealth Games in Delhi, and 3 World Championships. And I traveled all the time. We had 2 or 3 overseas trips every year. And so I had to become extremely disciplined. And also I was living out of home. I was living with friends and like your daughter. And I was very lucky to have the most amazing housemates, but you've got to cook and clean and on top of all of the, regular things. So I probably sacrificed more sleep than I should have, but I was just so determined to make it work that I did. And then I really did lean on a lot of people for support. I remember actually when I started at uni, bond was the most wonderful experience, and I had this academic advisor. She was I can't remember what her title was, but basically she said, I'm the person who can help you enroll in your classes each semester if you have any difficulties. And she was brilliant. Her name was Hayley. And so every semester, because I was usually traveling for 6 to 8 weeks of the semester, I got into the habit, and she was so lovely doing this. I would call her and say, Hayley, I'm going to be at university for weeks 2, 5 and 11. And then I've got to do some exams on an aeroplane and assignments here and there. And she would just sort it out. Every semester she helped me and sorted it out. And actually when I graduated, I invited her to my graduation, and I made a little speech, and I said, Hayley's just been the most wonderful academic liaison officer. I think that's what she was called. Every semester she's coordinated my subjects. And then she said to me, I actually stopped doing that job at Bond about 2 semesters after you started, and took a much, much more senior role. But because she was just so wonderful, she just didn't tell me that the whole time. And she just continued to help me, with my enrolling my subjects, which would have been a huge stress. So I made sure, when every class I had, the first lesson of the semester, I went to the teachers and I explained the situation. I think communication is key for people who have a lot on their plate. You just everyone's human. And if you say to a professor, I love this class and I'm only going to be able to be here a few weeks, but I want to do everything I can to be able to get the most out of it, then in my experience, people really bend over backwards to help. And Bond was fantastic also because the class sizes were smaller, and so there could be a much more individual approach. And on top of that, my swim club was 5 minutes down the road. And my coach, I trained with a coach called Dennis Cottrell, who a lot of people have heard of because he's coached so many Olympians. He's coached a couple of Paralympians as well, but most famously, he coached Grant Hackett for 20 odd years. And Dennis can be a very hard taskmaster, and he used to give me a lot of grief. But the most amazing thing about Dennis was before he was a swim coach, he was a teacher. And so he really understood and valued education. And so when I had a big exam or an assignment, he would, allow me to shuffle my swim program around a little bit. It's only possible, I say a little bit, because for swimmers at that elite level, you train 10 times a week. So I trained every morning and every afternoon, except Wednesday mornings, and then I'd swim on Saturdays instead. And each session, to be in Dennis's squad, we had to swim at least 9 kilometers a session. So we were swimming sort of
180 laps.
Yeah, 15 and 20 kilometers every day. And then of course there's appointments with the physiotherapist, the massage therapist, the dietitian, making sure that you're consuming the right foods and the right amount of food, all of those things. It took some time to get used to when I was living by or living away from home, I suppose. But I was just determined to make it work. And actually swimming is I think it's harder for people in a team sport. With swimming, my swimming session in the morning finished by 7 a.m. So then I had between 7 a.m. and 4 p.m. to go to university. For team sports, they train mostly during the middle of the day, so it's much more difficult. I did have some resistance from Swimming Australia at the time. They really wanted me not to study and to just swim. Swimming Australia is very different now, but back then, and I was met with a lot of resistance. They said that I wasn't focusing enough on swimming, and I've been the vice president of the Australian Swimmers Association for 7 years, and I still can't believe they gave me that advice. I mean, I think the biggest issue for athletes is that they put all their eggs in one basket and all they do is their sport. And I feel very grateful that, when I made my first Australian team, my parents said to me, brilliant, this is amazing. Hopefully you'll have a very rewarding sports career, but you need to remember that you also want to have a very rewarding post-sport career. And that was the best piece of advice. And so I wanted to, and I knew that it was always essential to have this sort of dual track approach where I was swimming and also making sure I was preparing for life after swimming.
Really, to some degree, hedging bets, if you want, from an investment point of view, you're sort of diversifying. You just don't know what can happen. And you've seen where people have had all those eggs in one basket. And, we've seen it publicly with Ian Thorpe and Grant Hackett, where there's been this struggle post swimming careers. And they're not the only professional athletes who have been lost, and they have to reinvent themselves, or again, draw in a network to help them reinvent.
That's right. They need to. I'm actually developing under my new business, which I know we'll discuss, but I'm developing content for athletes about this exact career transition, and you know, my view on the way to approach it so that you minimize the sort of, I don't know, the cliff on the others at the end of sport, because most athletes still, unfortunately, and not just Olympic and Paralympic athletes, I know professional athletes are in the same boat. Most people retire and they lose all of their structure. They've got nothing no next step to take. They keep eating the way they've been eating when they've been training for 6 hours every day. They lose their support network. They lose their friendship group. You know, it's every aspect of their life it feels like it's gone. And then it's sort of a dark place to be able to then sort of figure out where to go next. And I think sports organisations need to take responsibility for making sure that doesn't happen to people, you know, people who have given so much of their energy and time and you know, have given so much hope to children and young people and fans, and you know, I think there's an obligation on organisations to make sure that those people are equipped for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, and we'll get on to that as far as the broader public, you know, who are just going to work, doing their job, or have studied to do things, and then all of a sudden that gets taken away from them for no fault of their own. It can be economically, but we'll work up to that. So you obviously did very well with law, because you ended up working for the prestigious law firm Allen's Linkladders, and then you switched and became general counsel with the Australian Olympic Committee. And that led you on to Stanford, where you did an executive MBA over there, and then that changed your course of your life again, didn't it?
Yes, it did. Yeah, so that was Allen's was my first job, and I started off as a grad there. I was a mergers and acquisitions lawyer, which was enjoyable, but I knew it wasn't. Well, I don't know how to say it was enjoyable. It was a very good place to learn. Mostly because you were working such long hours, so you learned very quickly. And then also, obviously, you were surrounded by brilliant people who I was able to learn from. And then the deals that I was involved in were very, very interesting. But I knew it wasn't going to be for me long term. But to be honest, I didn't really think I'd work in sport. I didn't really actually realise that was a career path that was possible until this role came up with the Australian Olympic Committee. And yes, I got this sort of dream job where I was able to combine my legal skills and my passion for sport in this role as legal counsel for the Australian Olympic Committee. And I was there for 5 years. So the Summer Games that I started in that role in 2015. So I went to Rio for the Summer Olympics, and then Pyeongchang for the 2018 Winter Games. And it was really interesting seeing a game. I mean, it was the first Olympics I'd ever been to. Obviously, I've been to lots of Paralympics, but it was the first Olympic Games I've attended. And it was very interesting to see sport from an administrative perspective as opposed to an athlete's perspective. And actually, when I was an athlete, I used to think, we've got the hardest jobs here. But now when I was an administrator, I thought, gosh, like being an athlete is so luxurious. You can, everyone cares about your well-being all the time. And, when you're an administrator, or the lawyer in particular, no one cares, everyone's, and we had a number of sort of legal issues that were, public, made sort of headline news.
With Rio, yes. Yeah. Anyway, we won't go into that.
No, we won't go into that. But so that was a very busy time, but really interesting to see it from an administrator's perspective. And I then had my daughter, and while I was on maternity leave, I thought, I'd always wanted to do. I actually had always wanted to do an MBA, but the timing didn't really work. And then I had a little girl, and so this opportunity to do this executive MBA presented, and I thought, well, gosh, maybe this will be the next best thing. And actually it turned out to be just, I couldn't have wished for a better sort of program. So I think, I was very lucky in that regard. So I went over to Stanford in June last year. And while I was there, I'd always done a lot of motivational speaking and commentating, as you mentioned, sports commentary on the side, but I'd never really done it as a full-time thing. And someone asked if I'd deliver a keynote while I was at Stanford, and so I did. And there were a few hundred people in the audience, and a lot of those people were CEOs or presidents of their company. And it was a couple of people actually after my keynote. One of them had been the head of marketing for Coca-Cola, and he and the other guy had been the head of marketing for Disney. And they both came up to me and said, you should do this as a full-time thing. And I had always loved keynote. I mean, I love to talk. I love meeting new people.
No.
Have we you're like brain it, But no, I love to talk. I love meeting new people. I get a lot of energy from other people. So I'd really enjoyed doing it on the side, but I didn't really think that it was possible for me to do it full time. And they really made me realize that it was possible. And then all my cohort were very, very supportive. And then I actually gave another speech at the end. I gave the valedictory address at the end of the program, and that was a larger audience. And so by the time I left Stanford, I had a number of speeches lined up all around the world. And so I flew back to Australia, resigned from my job, which was, I'm risk averse usually. Mm-hmm. And I thought this is sort of one of the biggest risks I've ever taken. So I took the risk to start a company that was mostly involved international travel and speaking at large conferences. And for 6 months, it was a whirlwind. I flew two weeks after Stanford, I flew to Spain. And I spoke at an amazing event in Spain, and then I flew to Belarus, and I partnered with this women's health platform and developed a content that now sits on a 5-part course about empowerment that now sits on their platform. Then I was, back and forth to the US and speaking at, conferences in Vegas and, all over the place, San Francisco. It was just brilliant. And then I was in Saudi Arabia speaking at Aramco, which is the Saudi oil company, in March. I spoke there on International Women's Day, actually. And that was, I guess, the 8th of March. And then, I flew back home thinking, I wonder if this is going to be a real thing, this COVID. And then within a week, I was meant to be flying back to the US the next week. And I had 4 events lined up in New York. One was with the New York Times, these amazing, it was really building a lot of momentum. And I was so excited about it. And I was loving, every aspect of my work, which was something that I hadn't, there were aspects of the Allens that I loved. There were aspects of the AOC that I loved, but every part of it I was enjoying. And then COVID. And I thought, well, that was not the time to start a business that involved international travel and large conferences, mostly in America. And I was scratching out, I was just getting phone call after phone call and email after email, cancel. And the last thing I scratched out was I was meant to be the lead anchor for Channel 7 for the Tokyo Games. And that was the last thing to go. And I remember sitting on my couch. I'm so used to being busy. I remember sitting on my couch thinking, what have I done? Like, why? Like this thing that I thought was a risk was the biggest risk ever, and it was the wrong choice. And it was, to be honest, with all the things that I've faced, this is probably one of the hardest. This, because it affects. It's my livelihood. It's it's not.
You have a family now.
Yeah, I've got a family now.
Different commitments.
So I thought, I felt sorry for myself for an hour or so, and that it was very unfair, and I felt very, sad and a bit, deflated. And then I remember thinking, I guess I felt all those things, but at the back of my mind, I always knew that I wasn't going to give up. People suggested to me, well, why don't you just go back and get a job in law? And I was like, no, I don't want to. I know that it is possible for this business to pivot. I just needed to figure out what that looked like. And I guess, I did some work, or I still do. I'm an ambassador for a couple of different companies. And one of the companies called Jiffy.ai, it's based out of San Francisco, Palo Alto. The founder, it's his 3rd company, and he's been very successful. And I asked him, I said, this was when I started my company back in September last year. I said, what should I do? Like, how strategic should I be right now? And he said, your biggest asset, right now you have one asset. It's your speech. He said, perfect it. Don't be too strategic. Just go with the flow for a year, see where it lands. It'll feel natural what direction this needs to go in. And a lot of people gave me similar advice. And so I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And so I had a small digital presence, not really. I had kind of started doing some stuff on social media, but not a huge amount. And so I think that's why I felt the brunt of it even more, because I was at a point where there was a lot of momentum building, but I wasn't yet at the point, if it had happened 6 months earlier, I would have still been employed. If it had happened 6 months later, I would have had significantly more momentum and money, so I would have been able to give it more easily. I felt like I was at this point where I wasn't really known. I wasn't really that well known, but and I didn't really have too much of a digital presence. So, but I knew it was possible. I knew that something was possible, and I had to just figure out what that was. And so I reached out to a lot of different people who have been, I've had a lot of mentors over the years, who I've gathered along the way from many different places. One of whom is the reason I went to Stanford. And I said to them, what should I do? And one of the people I was connected to from Stanford, he introduced me to a woman who has a marketing and communications business in the US, and she has helped me manage like a full-scale rebrand. She's been the project manager for this massive rebrand that I've done. I've got a new website, so I relaunched last week. I've got a new website. I've got new digital social media channels, and I have new offerings as well. So what I'm in the process of developing, I do keynote speeches. I've got 3 flagship keynote speeches, and I can do them in person, and I really hope in-person stuff comes back, but I can also do them virtually. What I'm really excited about is this next project we're working on, which is to develop masterclasses for corporates, for students, and for athletes. And so I think that is kind of the next, that's the next big project for me, and the way in which I can still engage in a way that's meaningful and helpful to new audiences as well. I did a lot of stuff for corporates and, a little bit for athletes and students, but now I'm going to work with all 3 groups in a more engaged way, hopefully. And I think that, to be honest, this was always where the business was going to go. While I still love traveling and meeting people, and I hope that comes back, for a business to be able to scale, I can't just be flying around the world speaking at one-off conferences. So that the masterclasses is what I'm working on presently, and I'm also writing a book, which is a slow process. I get you. So those are the projects that
been there. I've written 4 books, and they're they are a labour of love. Sorry?
Would you like to ghostwrite another one?
No. I'll leave that all to you, Annie. But you talk about the corporates and the students and the athletes. One of the challenge I see coming up for society in general is going to be the thing that's affected you, COVID-19, is then making people redundant, or the path they thought they were on is no longer there. And I think the stats I saw the other day is something like 3.3 million Australians are either or underemployed, according to Roy Morgan research, and that doesn't include the JobKeeper, JobSeeker numbers, which have yet to come on. And of that, and I'm drawing on a CNBC article here, but they say in the millennial age groups, there's about 30 to 35% of that is millennials, and they know from data, from medical research and psychological studies that the long-term unemployed in the younger cohort has lots of negative consequences. So that message of how you confront this challenge is going to be very important, and obviously it's something you've done, and just wondering if you had any little tips there, or how people can frame their thinking, or what they can be doing.
Well, yes. So I can certainly share what I did. And it's not particularly, because mental health and wellbeing is so crucial. And I think one of the great things is that people are being much more open about it, about the importance of it, and people and encouraging people to reach out if they're struggling. For me, the things that helped a lot, I went back almost to when I was an athlete, and I became very regimented in my structure and my routine of the day. You know, I had a natural structure because of my work. And I should also say that not all, I'm on a few boards and chairs of athletes commissions and things. So I still had those projects, which were very fulfilling. But my day-to-day routine had fundamentally changed. And so I wrote down, you know, this is what you're going to do today. And it was wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, go for a run for an hour, sit in the sun for 30 minutes while you have a coffee, dance with Josie. I did these dance videos with my little girl for an hour, which was fun for us both. You know, and then when she slept, because I didn't have childcare as well for a few months when we were in the full lockdown, when she slept, she's a good sleeper. And so when she slept it during the day for a few hours, I would sit down and, you know, just reach out to people, contact people, see what I could do to pivot. And then the three things that I had to inject in every single day was exercise. Exercise helps me a huge amount. Music helped me a lot in a way that it never had before, just listening to upbeat music, mostly Beyonce. And the third one was humor. I cannot underestimate how much humor played a part in those few months back in sort of March, April, May. Even if it was like a 30-minute clip on Instagram or something that I saw online, or if it was watching a really, really great stand-up comedian. I watched one stand-up comedian, I think she's brilliant, and I watched her 1.5 hour Netflix special every night for about 3 weeks, because it just, that sort of endorphin
made you feel good.
Laughing.
Laughter is the best medicine, as they say.
Yeah,
it's an endorphin release. Yeah, that's
right. And I really felt a noticeable difference on days when I didn't exercise, in particular. And so I had to make sure I built that in. And actually, running has been great. Obviously, I love swimming. I have an injury at the moment which is preventing me from swimming, but I do try and get in salt water as much as I can. I know a lot of people live inland and that's not possible, but just being in water helps me feel better. And the other thing that I've more recently noticed is that I feel a lot of peace when I'm in nature. You know, even if it's just sitting in the sun and really feeling the sun on my face, or, you know, walking on grass with bare feet, or smelling jasmine in the garden, those things kind of help me to become less stressed and anxious. And actually, I think that I'm horrible with knowing who says quotes, but I read a quote that said, you know, it's something about, you know, we're all so busy, and even if we're not busy, we're stressed. And so what we need to build into our lives is these moments of stillness. It doesn't have to be hours or days at a time of, you know, going on into an ashram or yoga retreat or something like that, but just taking the time to stop like 3 or 4 times a day and smell a really beautiful flower or stare at this blue sky. And my daughter has helped me appreciate that a lot more. I mean, we sat on the ground the other day and watched an ant walk around in circles for about 15 minutes. And I thought, this is actually really interesting to see how this ant is existing. And obviously I would never ever do that, but it brings you back to the present moment, and it almost just helps with a sense of calm. Those things, and I think that actually, I know that those things aren't necessarily practical tools for how to sort of help you get a job or help, you know, but I think that the more you're able to be present and calm and just, you know, at peace, then your mind opens up to what you can do.
You get a clarity. You just get rid of the noise and let the ideas come to you, and things will come out of somewhere. You know, it's funny we talk about this. I do a lot of good thinking in the shower or I'm swimming or rain, but because I was thinking about this, you know, what we talk about today. And my mind went back to a conference in 1996. There was the motivational speaker for that was a guy, you might know him, he's from New Zealand. I can't remember his name, but he lost his legs. He fell asleep on a railway track and he lost his legs as a young fellow.
Oh gosh.
And his motivational speech was he climbs this ladder. He became a sign painter, a writer or something. And he sits up on this trestle, 1.5 meters or 2 meters high. And that's where he talked to from the stage. I hadn't thought of that guy for 24 years, but because I had this clarity and I was going to be talking to you, it came back like it was yesterday. It's amazing what you have inside. And one of the things he said is, after his punchline was, oh, people said, someone said, geez, you were lucky you got run over by that train, you know, because it's led to this amazing speaking career.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, lucky? Yeah, really?
Well, at least it was the bottom half.
Well, the bottom, yeah, that's true.
But it is, Vern, I was going to say, there's one book that I've read recently that I also felt described this in a really good way. It's called Untamed by Glennon Doyle, and she's got a very interesting story. But she felt like it was this, she feels like she tries to sink into her body, and then when there's all the noise is pushed out and it's just her and calmness, she feels this nudge to help her figure out where to go. And then when that nudge feels like the right way to go, she almost feels like she fills up with liquid gold, this warmth. And I was, over the course of these last few months, I've been thinking about that process, and I've been trying as much as possible to sort of sink into my feelings and think, okay, what seems to make sense here? And that description, the sort of sinking into yourself, rather than, you can look outside, you can read books and you can speak to psychology, you can be external, and that helps, speaking to other people. But the ability to just be really inside yourself and then feel this nudge towards the right thing to do. And then if it's the right thing to do, then you feel this warmth and sense of gold, I felt like was a really clear way of describing it, and something that sort of I resonated with.
I can relate to that. And it's and until you get that clarity or that time to think, then you just don't know who can come into your life, or who was in your life that you decide to reach out to. And, you know, and some people are afraid of rejection, or I better not ring out, I better not do this. Well, again, you put that into perspective with someone who's, you know, lost an arm and their parents have been killed. Well, you know, or they've had their legs cut off by a machete, you know, in Rwanda. It's, someone says no, well, what there's no harm, you know, there's no real downside in it. You reach out and you just keep moving forward until you get that yes. Yeah. And I think it's a wonderful quote you had, that success begins with one act of kindness.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. I guess I alluded to it, that you know, I have been the beneficiary of so much kindness in my life, like teachers, neighbors, my parents, friends. And that's really what I gave a TED talk earlier this year. That's what it was about, the kindness and courage of superheroes. And those superheroes were, you know, everyday people, everyday superheroes. And they were the people I just mentioned. And that is really that's how I feel that, you know, now, because I have been the beneficiary of so much of that and so grateful for it. Now, if I can ever see an opportunity to help someone, I take it. And I read another book recently called Phosphorescence by Julia Baird, and she speaks about, she's been through a lot of health issues recently and all sorts of different challenges. And her book is about finding light through darkness. And the message really is about, we spend so much time thinking about ourselves and what's right for us, and in some ways being quite selfish. And the best way to find the light and to feel a sense of purpose is to reach out to other people and be compassionate towards others and be generous towards other people. And that absolutely resonated with me. And that's what I have, you know, witnessed. It's not even the other, I guess the other moment that comes to mind with, you know, this sort of concept, and I really like how you phrased it about, you know, it's a feather in someone else's life, but it's a real weight in your own, was when I was at the Beijing Games and my roommate and I decided to go on an adventure on the last day of the games, and she was retiring from swimming, so it was going to be her last ever competition. And we were very close, and we decided to do this very special thing. We went to the Summer Palace, which is it's just outside of Beijing, and it's this beautiful temple. But when we arrived, we realized that it was probably not the right place for us to have come, because my roommate Kat was in a wheelchair. And the attraction of the Summer Palace is this thing called the Hill of Longevity, which is at the top of 1,000 stairs. And of course, there's no elevator in this sort of ancient temple.
Literally 1,000 stairs?
Literally 1,000 stairs.
Wow, okay.
And so we were standing at the bottom of this enormous staircase that just led up to the sky and this incredible temple at the top. And Kat said to me, why don't you take my camera up and take photos, and that's how I'll experience it. And it was actually really disappointing, because it was the last time we were ever going to travel together. We really wanted to do something special. And as I was about to head up, these two men approached us, and they were Chinese. They weren't associated with a Paralympic team, but they didn't speak much English, but one of them was motioning towards his back. And I said to Kat, I think he wants to carry you up. And it was about 35 degrees Celsius and literally 1,000 stairs. And Kat said to me, she's like, there's no way they can carry me up. And the other man was saying that, indicating that he could carry her wheelchair. And so we gave it a go, and we got Kat on this man's back. I have the most amazing photo of this moment. And this was one step after another. This man just lifted Kat up, and he just started walking towards this staircase, and he just, one step up after another, and up he started climbing. And there were so many people there that day, and it was just, teams of people on these stairs. And as we were walking up, it was like ascending to the heavens. People were just parting the way, and people were so,
wow.
Like, it was such an emotional thing to see. And after about 200 stairs, the man was drenched in sweat. He couldn't carry on, and he was, heaving really. And so he put Kat down on the step, and I remember sitting down next to her thinking, we're 200, I can't get her down, and I can't get her up. So I don't know what we're going to do now. And then out of nowhere, this other member of the public just picked Kat up and kept going up these stairs. And then after about 200 more stairs, he couldn't go on, and someone else just stepped in and picked her up and kept going. And by the time, and everyone who helped and all their families just stayed with us the whole time. And it took us hours to get to the top of this temple.
Really?
And by the time we got there, we just had this group, and everyone was so emotional. But it had just been this sense that these people, they were just there on their day to enjoy the day, but they actually got so much more out of it, helping us get Kat up there. And also they gave us this opportunity, to have this experience that we so wanted, because it was so special for Kat and I. And then, at the end of the day, the original two Chinese men, they helped us all the way back down and out to the front of the gate. And we just got in a taxi and headed back, and we were like, we will never see them again. And they just, out of the goodness of their heart. And so I remember when we were sitting in the taxi on the way back, I remember thinking, and I think it was, it was a good metaphor, because, if there's, if you can see a way to help someone up the stairs, take it, maybe it's not 1,000 stairs, and maybe you can't make it all the way to the top on your own. But I think the message there was that if you can see that someone needs your help, start by helping them, and other people will see you, and they'll step in and they'll help.
And it's I think it's just an amazing life. Normally that would be some sort of analogy or story, but that's the real life of that. And so true, one step at a time. And that will be the challenge that many people will face out there when, businesses don't reopen, or they can't reopen their own businesses. And people will come in and help you. They will. You've just got to find that inner peace, as you say, find that period of where you can just, sometimes doing nothing is doing a lot.
Exactly.
I think it was Warren Buffett said, he spends most of his day thinking, because you're just processing things. I think this is wonderful. And that's kind of that person on top of a mountain did not just fall there. Your friend Kat got to the top there. She didn't fall there. She was assisted to get there. Yeah, which is where I think, as I said, I think that's going to be part of our community challenge in the next 12 months, 2 years, as the fallout from all this filters through. But we've gone over time, but I just wanted to finish on your greatest achievement, and that's of being a mum. You're a parent now, and your mum and dad have done a wonderful job raising you. And so as a parent, parents, you and Elle, what sort of life lessons do you want to pass on to your beautiful daughter, Josie?
Yeah, well, I feel like she's taught me more life lessons than I could ever teach her. She's just divine, this little girl. But I think that, it's interesting how children are just born with a personality. Like Josie is as my mum said to me a couple of days ago, I was very extroverted as a child and very confident. And Josie is, of course, you know, confident, but much, much more reserved and more observant, I think, and much calmer. And I said to Mum,
more like a father.
much more like that. And I said to my mum, I was like, was Josie like me? And Mum, without even hesitating and not intending to be, she goes, oh, she was holding Josie. She said, oh gosh, no, you were nothing like this gorgeous little darling. And I thought, oh. But of course she meant, you know, Josie is extremely, she really I mean, she's 2, so who knows, this could change, but she knows, she's very definite in her views of what she wants to do and what she doesn't want to do, but she's quite reserved. So she'll sit back and watch a situation before diving in. I definitely did the dive in before I assessed a situation. But I guess the thing is, you know, people say to me, do you want her to be a swimmer? And I think, well, firstly, hopefully not. But if she wants to be a swimmer, great. But I think the thing that is crucial for Al and I is to see, you know, help guide her, but don't force her down any path. We sort of are there to sort of guide and support whatever path she chooses to take. And I guess it's sort of helping her find her truth and not doing things. And I always want her to feel like the choices that she's making are because they are fulfilling to her, not because they are fulfilling to Al or I, or because she thinks that that's what she should do or she ought to do. I want her to do things, you know, because she finds joy and passion in doing them. And I feel like that's what my parents helped me do. They never, you know, they didn't want me to be a swimmer or a runner or a musician or a, you know, skateboarder or a mathematician. You know, there was no preconceived judgment. It was just sort of following along and helping to guide as best you can. I guess it's, you know, it's a learning curve though. It's you know, you learn the whole way along, but that's, I think, the greatest thing, and always enabling her, you know, knowing that, and I think this is something I've already started telling her. She's my grandma, who was my soulmate, was called Josie, and there's a picture of my grandma Josie when she was 10 months old, and it's at the door of my daughter's bedroom. And I said to Josie, you know, my grandma used to say this to me, that to be happy, and that's ultimately all we want for Josie, all you need is something to do, someone to love, and something to look forward to. And as long as at every point in time she has those 3 things and she's fulfilled, then I think that Al and I will have done a, you know, great job.
I have no doubt you'll do a great job. I always think that, you know, with the girls, we just wanted them to have a safe place.
Yes.
Because as you said, at 10 years old, you get a hurtful comment, but you know you can come back and regroup. That, you know, someone loves me. That's
always you. Yeah, my parents said that to me all the time. You need to, know that no matter what goes on out there, home is where you can. It's always going to be happy and safe, and
where you can come and you can talk about the issues, and we can try and resolve it, or find the resources that will help resolve whatever that challenge may be. And again, I use that for what I think are the challenges coming up, is that you see a lot of millennials drifting back towards home because they don't have they can't afford the mortgages or the rents, so they're coming back. So I think offering a safe place, a place where people can sort of gather and regroup and then go back out, more of a hand up than a hand out type approach. But I think offering that to any child is the best thing they can have, knowing that there's that warmth inside. I can always come home.
Yeah. Because then it's much easier for yes. My parents say the exact same thing to me, Vern. It's always, you know, it doesn't really. All you need to know is that someone's got your back. I guess it goes back to the same part about, you know, you just need one person who supports you, and if you can get that, if we can give that to Josie, and for her to know that, you know, whatever's happening out there, we're always there for her, then that's the best thing that you can do.
Yeah, it gives you that foundation from which to build.
Yes.
But you can give her one added advantage in life.
What's that?
A Maroons jersey.
Yeah, I knew that was no.
I had to get that in for your dad. Although I'm not going to boast too much the way this year's gone for Broncos and looking for Queensland.
Don't worry, Dad was logged off by now. He won't be listening to this part.
I was being brave putting it in at the end. So I can say thanks to Annie. Bye. The cowards run. No, Annie, it's been lovely chatting with you, and thank you for giving so much of your time. And I must just say, anyone who wants to sign up for Annie's free newsletter, it's Annabelle, ANNABELLEW, Williams, AnnabelleW.com. And yeah, it's again, to get that inspiration and that motivation and that little key for success. I think if you sign up for AnnabelleW.com, it'll be wonderful.
Yes, I'm going to be putting out a monthly newsletter, and
monthly newsletter, yeah.
Monthly newsletter, and then all sorts of different things on social media. So please, yeah, anyone feel free to reach out however you like. There's all sorts of ways to contact me, and yeah, thank you, Vern. It's been so lovely having this chat.
And hopefully we can do it in person once these border restrictions get lifted. We can come down to Sydney and catch up with Gracie down there and yourselves. It'd be lovely.
Brilliant. That'd be wonderful. We look forward to that.
Thanks, Annie.
Thanks so much, Vern. Bye.
Cheers.
Everyone.
Bye.